It's your boy Nefakari Desaline back in the building. Yes, indeed. And today we got to talk about the reason why Black history must be taught by Black people only. Let's get into it. You ever wonder why the history that we learn in school never leaves you feeling empowered? In fact, if you go by the narrative given to you by the history books in school, you would think that you, as a Black man or woman, has contributed nothing to society, has contributed nothing to humanity, has pretty much done nothing except occupy the position of victim and pretty much get rolled over and bulldozed by anyone that you came across. You pretty much had no stories of conquest, no stories of dominance, no stories of glory, no days of victory. And if you go by that narrative, then I can understand why a lot of you got low self-esteem and a lot of y'all just be out in the world just doing foolish things. But for those of us who, actually took the time to understand who we are, where we came from, to understand where we're going, we can understand the clear differences in the accurate narrative of what really happened throughout history and the narrative that we're given, the primary source given by the Europeans, specifically the Europeans that we've had to go against, the Europeans that we've had to fight against. Their narrative, their point of view is the primary source of knowledge and information. That is the one that people go to first. That is the one that people look up to as the gospel. Unfortunately, because of us, it's not that we didn't write anything down. And the example that I'm giving today, you'll see that, in fact, Black people did write everything down that happened during this time in history, but it was just ignored. It was just pushed to the side for the narrative given by the European, the Western European. And in this particular example I'm going to use today, the white Frenchman. We got to get into it. As you know, the other day, I dropped a video titled "The Greatest Women of All Time, the Black Women During the Haitian Revolution." And in that video, we gave honor and respect and glory and much appreciation to the Black women that took part in the Haitian Revolution. Those that served as spies, those that served as agents, those that served on the battlefield, front line, died, gave their life for what we can enjoy today, the independence and being released from the shackles of European chattel slavery. We gave honor to the wives of the generals. We gave honor to the women that were soldiers and lieutenants and sergeants and, got it popping, grabbed a shotgun, grabbed a machete. We gave honor to all of them, and we didn't even have time to honor every single one because we would have been on there for 3, 4, 5 hours if we went into the detail of every single legendary woman. And me just surfing through the web, just brushing up on some information. As you know, I'm coming with information that I already know, but just scrolling through what you would find on Google on the front page, there's actually a Wikipedia page titled "Women in the Haitian Revolution." Now, this is a new page. Of course, I've been studying the Haitian Revolution since I was a young boy, since my mom, had me on her lap, and my grandmother had me, sitting down at the dinner table, giving me stories of what she lived through and what she heard her grandparents and her parents gave her when she was a young girl. So I already come with information directly from the source. But, it's good to brush up on information when you're about to release a video. So I went through this page. It's not too long. But one thing I do notice is the primary source of information. When you look down in the books and the research that was done to create this page, you would see that the majority of the information came from a white Frenchman by the name of Philippe Girard. Now, Philippe Girard, by the naive eye, by the untrained eye, you might not really know who that is, unless you go do some digging. And Philippe Girard is not just an average, ordinary European author. He is a pro-French nationalist, pro-French European imperialist, pro-Rome Maurice, pro-Western civilization type of white guy, right? So him being used as the primary source of information on what Black women during the Haitian Revolution were doing, you already know you're on the wrong foot. But this is normal. This is the status quo. This is how things are. When it comes to our history, whether Haitian history, Black American history, African history, Jamaican history, whatever you name it, the primary source of information is going to be the opponent. For example, I guarantee if you go look up Jamaican history, a good chunk of the information that you're going to find is going to come from British sources. Just like when you look up Haitian history, the majority of information that you find is going to come from French sources. Just like when you look up Black American history, the majority of the sources you are going to find is going to come from white American textbooks, authors, research facilities, etc., etc. The homegrown, true to the bone, grassroots narrative is never going to be the primary narrative. Even when you are in the position of victory, just like in the Haitian Revolution, the losers got to tell the story. That was the first time in history where the losers got to tell the story. They got to write the story down, and it was used as gospel around the world, and the losers got paid reparations. That was the only time in history where that took place. I actually have videos on how the French managed to pull that off. Go into my catalog, check it out. But to the untrained eye, if you just fall on this Wikipedia page without checking the source of the information, you're just going to read it, take it as gospel, take it as the God honest truth, and just keep it moving. Now, we're going to dive deep into what it says. And I want you to go, after this, go check out my video that I dropped the other day titled The Greatest Women of All Time, Black Women During the Haitian Revolution. And then you will contrast it to what the Wikipedia page is saying. Now, let's get into it. It starts off saying, during the Haitian Revolution, Haitian women of all social positions participated in the revolt that successfully ousted French colonial power from the island. In spite of their various important roles in the Haitian Revolution, women revolutionaries have rarely been included within historical and literary narratives of the slave revolts. However, in recent years, extensive academic research has been dedicated to their part in the revolution. Now, as you know, like I said, this is a new Wikipedia page. Obviously, this was not here before. Trust me, I done scoured the internet. I done dig deep years of research on the Haitian Revolution. This is a new page because, yes, like they said, that is the truth. Women are now getting they just due. But within Haitian circles, within Haitian culture, within Haitian families, we've always given women their just due. We've always known the legendary female participants in the Haitian Revolution amongst us within our culture. You know, it's just within the wider society, the global society. The women are now globally getting their shine, which they deserve. And it's the reason why I made that video myself the other day. Go check that out. It continues by saying, in the French colony of Saint-Domingue, enslaved black women suffered particular forms of gendered violence in addition to the standard abuse and mistreatment of slaves. Abuse of enslaved women commonly occurred in the colony. Part of the logic of slavery was that since slaves were property, they could be used as sex objects by their owners. Due to the high infant mortality and a low fertility rate, slave women were kept from engaging in monogamous family relationships and instead treated as objects of reproduction. Many of these women resorted to suicide. Now, something that most people don't know, when you are in a high stressful situation, like being kidnapped from your homeland and human trafficked into a foreign island to work until you die from organ failure, women are not going to be fertile in hostile environments. Logic being that if it's a hostile environment, it's most likely not conducive to raising children and having a family. So that part of their biological function decreases heavily to where most of the women on the island couldn't even have kids, period. If they even had kids, that was a miracle. Like I said, most people died within 18 to 24 months anyway, being worked to death. So that is actually part of the reason why the revolt even happened, because the conditions on the island of Hispaniola were just so inhumane and just outrageous that it was just a matter of time before, you know, it was just bloodshed all over the place, and they deserve everything they got. And let's get back into it. The Haitian Revolution was instigated by slaves in an attempt to not only liberate themselves, but to remove the French from the island entirely. Rebels used a variety of tactics to meet this goal. Women participated in the revolt at all levels. As laborers, enslaved women began to organize and refuse to perform life-threatening work. In one such case, women who worked the night shift in a sugarcane mill protested working with machinery in the dark that could seriously injure or kill them. The practice of voodoo was a tool of the Haitian Revolution. Enslaved women who escaped their slave owners to live as maroons were able to return to their roles as practitioners of voodoo because they would not be punished for rejecting French Catholicism. Communities of escaped slaves turned to voodoo mumbos, priestesses, which radicalized them and facilitated the organization of a liberation movement. Voodoo mumbos, which were female priestesses of the Haitian voodoo culture, were also typically knowledgeable of herbal remedies as well as poisons, which were weaponized and used against French slave owners and their families during the revolution. Ideologically, the image of a Haitian voodoo priestess inspired insurgents to fight the colonial government in order to not only liberate themselves, but to serve a higher spiritual purpose. The most famous mumbo in Haitian revolutionary history is Cecile Fatima. Born of an enslaved woman and a white Frenchman, she is remembered for having performed a voodoo ceremony for hundreds of rebel slaves the night before the Haitian Revolution began, inspiring them through ritual song and dance to take up the fight for freedom. She reportedly lived to be 112 years old, never ceasing to practice voodoo. And like I said, another thing they don't mention is she went on to marry a high-ranking general within the Haitian Revolutionary Army who went on to serve in the royal court of the regime of General Henri Christophe, and then he went on to become president in the 1840s, which means that she was the first lady of Haiti later down the line, and her sister was the wife of General Henri Christophe, the Queen of Haiti, Queen Marie-Louise Quavidad. So this is a powerful bloodline, and King Henri Christophe's great-great-great-granddaughter, I believe, is the wife of President Jean-Claude Duvalier. So yes, this bloodline has remained powerful on the island since before the nation was created. So they don't really give her that just due. They pretty much left that out for whatever reason. But like I said, you gotta get it from the source. Black people have to control our narrative. We have to control the story of our ancestors. We have to tell the story, because if we leave it up to especially our opponent, things are going to be left out, things are going to be ignored, things are not going to be acknowledged, and the story is going to be written in a way that presents them as the benevolent and superior force within every single engagement. It continues by saying, women also took up arms and served in the anti-colonial Haitian military, participating at all levels of military involvement. Some scholars attribute the widespread participation of women in combat to West African traditions of allowing women to actively serve in battle. Like I said, I did videos on that. That's actually true. Some progress as high up to the ranks of the military as possible. Marie-Jeanne Lamartinière, for example, served in Toussaint's army. She led the insurgent forces at the famous Battle of Crête-à-Pierrot. You know what I mean? That's a fact. I did a video on that. Go check that out. The greatest women of all time, the women in the Haitian Revolution. Women also assisted in carrying arms, cannons, and ammunition. They served as military nurses, relying on herbal and folk medicines to treat rebels in remote areas with little to no resources. In addition, women worked as spies, posing as sex workers and merchants in order to deliver messages and gain information about the French. Like I said, this is all facts. I put that in the video yesterday. Now, this is where I have a problem. The final section, all the way at the bottom, they put their BS all the way at the bottom, where you can't really see it. But if you made it down, they got to clean everything up. At the end of the day, they got to make themselves look as the superior force in every single engagement, like I just mentioned. In the section labeled punishments, it goes, because of the high involvement of women in the Haitian Revolution, colonial French military forces let go of their plans to institute gender-specific punishments. Now, that one sentence, we got to go and break that down immediately. That is a bold-faced lie. Like, why would they even lie so blatantly? Like, come on, bro. It's like, when somebody lies and it's just so outrageous, you just look at them like, bro, what was the point of even telling that lie? Like, you just lied just to lie. Like, you just lied for sport. When they said they came to institute gender-specific punishments, meaning that the French military only came to assassinate black men. That's what they're saying. So if there was a black girl reading this, learning about the women of the Haitian Revolution, she would think that, oh, look at these, benevolent French soldiers. They were going to come and just, blow my father's head off and my brother's head off and my husband's head off. But they were going to, protect me, though. They were going to bring me back to France and, let me go to school and, let me live happily ever after. But why would that make sense? So before the revolution, they were abusing black women, burning black women alive. Black women were dying from organ failure, low fertility rates, hostile environment. Their children, their husbands getting sold down the river, their children getting sold down the river, their children getting dying, high infant mortality. So that was just before the revolution. But after the revolution, when everybody took up arms, they were going to protect the black women and they were going to just assassinate the men by gender specific punishments. So that was just a bold-faced lie. And I seen that, and that is what inspired this video, and which is why black people must only talk from our perspective, our narrative, for our ancestors, because this is just insane, and if you're a child reading this, or if you're a young person reading this and you don't have any elders, you don't have any OGs, you don't have anybody that can really steer you back on course, you would just be sent off down the river thinking that the French had some type of benevolence. And this is not the first time they've done this. They do this throughout the entire narrative of the revolution, where they sprinkle in nonsense about how they were like trying to be friendly. Like one time there was a story of how the French general stopped the battle to congratulate the Haitian soldiers because he admired their courage and their valor on the battlefield. Like, bro, nobody's gonna stop the middle of a bloody war and then talk about, oh yeah, good looks, bro. Yeah, I love how you shoot the shotgun, bro. Yo, I really rock with you. Like, bro, this was just nonsense that it, oh my god, bro. It gets me so mad just even thinking about it. But this is the man. Let's continue. When captured, women revolutionaries were executed alongside their men, only occasionally receiving special treatment on the basis of their gender. Black women got no special treatment during the Haitian Revolution, okay? It's literally thousands of black women's skeletons at the bottom of the Caribbean Sea because of the French colonial army drowning them because they refused to give information about their husbands and their brothers and their sons that were actively involved in the rebellion. So there was no special treatment. Black women were being hung in front of the church. Black women were being drowned. Black women were being abused, set on fire. Black women were being eaten by dogs, just like the men, even as young as 13 years old. The policy was everybody above 12 is to be seen as an enemy combatant. So even young girls as young as 14, 15 were getting the same treatment as a grown man that was an enemy combatant on the battlefield. So there was no special treatment. They're just blatantly telling bold-faced lies. And when you go look at the bottom of the page, the references, the bibliography, you see that Philippe Girard's name is all over all of this. A white Frenchman, pro-French white nationalists is being used as the primary source of information on black women during the Haitian Revolution. Now, does that make sense to a logical thinking person who has a few brain cells to rub together? No, it does not. But this is the world we live in. This is the world that we live in, and we have to control our narrative. And that's the reason why I even made this YouTube page. That is the reason, my inspiration of why I made this YouTube page, and I drop bangers on bangers on bangers about Haitian history, because I've grown up reading the constant nonsense of how my mother and my grandmother would tell me one story, but then I would go to school, or then I would go in these books that were written by non-Haitians, by non-Africans, and they would be telling a whole different narrative that contradicted everything my parents told me. And then I realized they're just bold-faced lying, straight up. They're not even telling half truth. They're just bold-faced lying to cover up for the dirt that they did back in those days, which is why the records that they kept are locked in the archives or were destroyed, because they don't even want to face the facts of what they did. The Haitian king himself, the son of the Haitian king, was assassinated by the French government in 1805. But no one is even going to acknowledge that on any major platform. I don't even think you're going to find that on Wikipedia. It's just insanity, bro. Insanity. But like I said, this is why black history must be taught by black people. Point blank, period. End of discussion. The Wikipedia page ends by saying, Sanit Belair, a black freedwoman who served as a lieutenant in the army of Toussaint Louverture, was sentenced to death following her capture. At the moment of her execution, she refused to be blindfolded by her executioners and is documented to have stared them in the eyes as she died. That is a fact, okay? Like I said, they sprinkle the nonsense and they throw in some facts, because you can't just tell a bold-faced lie, but they got to throw in, the little sprinkle, like a little sprinkle of salt that you throw in on like a boiled egg. They got to sprinkle in some nonsense every single time, which is why I made this channel. Instead of just sitting back and complaining and just, sobbing and moaning and crying like a punk, I'm just going to make my own YouTube channel, my own media platform, and I'm going to pull out the real story. I'm going to pull out the real talk of what really happened and what really went down from the African perspective, from the black man's perspective, the perspective that's never acknowledged. It makes no sense for the losers to be given the primary position of knowledge and information when it comes to what happened. The only way to combat this is to make our own platforms, pull out the real stories. Even when we talk about the movies that are made, we complain about how there are not enough movies made about our glory days, our days of victory, our days of conquest. The only movies that they make are slave movies, Emmett Till movies, civil rights movies, movies that reinforce that position of victimhood. Well, guess what? We have to create our own movies. We got to put up our own $50 million, $60 million, $100 million to create our own movies to combat everything that we claim is going against us. Point blank, period. I'm not here to complain about it. I'm not here to, just complain like a little punk. I'm here to get it popping, bro. Start our own platforms, compete. Do the same thing. Get our own authors and compete. And speaking of authors, like I said, during the Haitian Revolutionary period, General Dessalines, he had a personal secretary, Baron Tonnerre, who actually was assassinated a week after he was, and he kept documents and records of everything that happened during the revolutionary government, during Dessalines' regime. But of course, that is never used as the primary source of information. General Henri Christophe, he also had a secretary by the name of Jules Chanlat, who kept records of everything that happened during the regime, wrote many books, corresponded with many heads of state around the world. All those records are still kept. All those records are still available. But those are not used as primary sources of information. The American narrative is going to be used as the primary source of information, where the Louisiana Purchase is the only reason why they even mention it. The French narrative is going to be used as the primary source of information. And it's not specific to Haiti. This is everywhere. When you go to the history of Ghana, I guarantee it's the British narrative that is the prevailing narrative. The history of Nigeria, the British narrative. The history of Mali, the French narrative. The history of Jamaica, the British narrative. The history of Black America, the white American narrative. The Martin Luther King, I had a dream. They're not going to tell you about Malcolm X. They're not going to tell you about the underground grassroots movements that were popping. They're not going to tell you about none of that. They're going to tell you about when they were victorious. They're going to tell you about, when they deported Marcus Garvey. They're not going to tell you about what happened with Marcus Garvey. They're only going to talk about Marcus Garvey to tell you that they deported him, or they're not going to mention him at all. Because in my history books growing up, they didn't mention Marcus Garvey not once. So we're lucky if you even get mentioned. And if you do get mentioned, it's only going to be in context to something that makes them look victorious. Like when the United States mentioned how they got that large piece of land, the Louisiana Territory, and the United States Kingdom grew extremely larger with that deal. That's the only reason why they mentioned the Haitian Revolution, because they talk about how they acquired a large piece of real estate. That's the only reason why they talk about it, and this is their reality. So we have to talk about it. We have to control the narrative. We have to get it popping. Point blank, period. Stop complaining. Get on your business. Let's do it. It's your boy Never Card Dessalines back in the building. Yes, indeed. and I'm gone. Peace. Man, how could I forget about this? This might be the most flagrant piece of this entire Wikipedia page. I can't believe I managed to overlook this. We have to see the nonsense that they sprinkled in on this one. Oh my goodness. Check it out, man. Like I said, it says some women are reported to have used sex to obtain money, weapons, resources, military intelligence, manumission, or mercy for themselves or their families. These incidents were rarely the choices of the women involved. Rather, women's bodies were used by the Haitian military to further the revolution, which reinforced the pre-revolutionary patriarchal exploitation of women. Now, when you look at the source of where this information came from, of course, it's Philippe Girard. You know what I mean? The white boy that we, you know what I mean, smacked up on the battlefield. You know, if you're a young girl reading this, she's basically trying to say that the black women during the Haitian Revolution that decided to stay and fight, because there were many black women that decided to chicken out and run to Louisiana with the white boys. The black women that stayed and fought with the black men, that fought and died with the black men, that pretty much assassinated thousands of Europeans with black men. He basically said that these women had no agency. They had no personal choice in the matter. And the only reason that they carried this out against the French colonial military was because it was patriarchal exploitation. That's what he said it was. He basically compared the Haitian revolutionary rebel generals to the French colonial planters that were burning black women alive, stuffing black women into barrels studded with spikes and throwing them down mountainsides. Basically, the white boys that were drowning black women in the Caribbean Sea. He's basically saying that the Haitian rebel generals are no different than the white boys that were, you know, burning black women to death, that were, you know, beating black women to death, that, you know, hung black women, that shot black women, that fed black women to dogs, that pretty much, you know, made black women eat feces, that pretty much made black women get eaten by ants. You know, he basically said that the generals of the Revolutionary Army were no different. They were practicing pre-revolutionary patriarchal exploitative abuse against black women, and black women had no choice in the matter, and they had no agency, and they had no voice, and they had no power or dignity, or, you know, do you see the attack? You know, they put that at the bottom of the page though. And then when you look at the source, like I said, Philippe Girard is studied all over the source. So, you know, like I said, would a black person speak like this of his own ancestors? No, but this is what happens when the European narrative is the one that is the, you know, prevailing narrative. Unfortunately, if you are a young girl, 16, 17 years old, reading this, and you're naive and you don't really know, you know, you could be led astray. You could go from feeling love and admiration for your ancestors to now looking at them as no different than the white French colonial planter that was burning you alive and burning you to death. So that in itself is why black people must teach our own history, because when you leave it especially up to your opponent, this is what you get. Your opponent is obviously going to throw shade. Your opponent is obviously going to lie on you. Your opponent is obviously going to, you know, throw salt on your game, try to tarnish your legacy, trying to tarnish your image and build himself up in front of the people. So it's up to you to control your narrative and dictate everything that goes on from start to finish. Point blank, period. And I know y'all feel me. And, you know, it is what it is, man. Black people must teach our own children our own story, our own narrative, because this is what happens. This is why we admire people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, even though these were multimillionaire human traffickers that were at the head of criminal organizations that got rich through criminal enterprise. But we look at them as honest and admirable men. But then we look at Dessalines and Toussaint and we barely even know anything about them because they're not even really mentioned or glorified in the history books at all. So, it's up to us to change that, though. Like I said, it's up to us. And like I said, man, we're going to do it. We're going to build this platform up to 1 million followers, you know, and stamp it right here. I said it. September 4th, 2022. I said it. We're going to get up to 1 million and y'all going to get up there with me. So let's get into it. It's your boy Neferkari Dessalines back in the building. Yes, indeed. And I'm gone. Peace. One love.
Reincarnated, I'm back in original fashion. I left on a horse and came back in the ass, and I left with abundance and came back to famine. We used to be pyramids, now we be rapping. Look how the mighty have fallen. Used to be running, now we be walking. When you be cooning, that's when they applauded. Selling your soul, your sons and your daughter. Gotta come up in this shit, they stuck in the mix. Really, my heart to be breaking. That's why I'm stacking that paper and handle my business. Pass it down in generation. Talking about money and power and building a nation. That's a deadly combination. Never be watching the TV, they pushing agendas. Falsifying information. information. Know they got malice intentions. Step in the room and I'm feeling the tension. Enemy watching, he blocking my vision. Get for the check cause I need my redemption. Building my kingdom, I need it protected. Ready for war like a young Money Congo. Never decided the team is the motto. Up in the crib and I'm whipping up waffles. Up in the crib and I'm smoking gelato. I'm chilling, I'm taking my pain and make it ambition. I'm blessed by the gods, but I ain't religious. I came for the power, they came for the bitch. They making no hourly wage, I got business. This is an art, and they could never be taught. Selling my soul, I can never be bought. Play with my money, I see you ain't caught. Run to the check and I do it for sport. Babylon falling, I go to the source. Packing my luggage and go overseas. Shorty be with me and she so elite. Shorty be chocolate, I'm calling her Hershey. Secret intelligence probably gon' murk me. Don't fuck with brands, cause nigga I'm Haitian. Say the wrong shit and get smack in their faces.